everyone, I'm Dr. Payton Tontz of New Paradigm Psychology, bringing you my May 2020 video in my monthly series. And this one is called The Essential Self and the Alchemy of Transformation. So this video is going to very much build on last month's video, which I'm going to, at the beginning here, recap for those of you that haven't seen it. I do recommend watching that video as well, as these two go really hand in hand. So I do want to say that I've created a portal on my website to receive your donations if you're inspired and feel the value of what these videos bring for you. I would welcome any financial donation that you're inspired to offer to support my work. So you can go to newparadigmpsychology.com and find the page to make a donation. Okay, so to recap last month's video, I established the basic teachings on the essential self, and I presented them from the standpoint of the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, which is what I've done. My own personal spiritual journey was very much within that for many years of my life, and I did my dissertation work on presenting these teachings in a psychological language. So basically what I established in the last video is the teachings on the nature of the self and the understanding that in the human psyche there are actually two coexisting realities. The essential self, which is pure consciousness, pure awareness, presence. It's talked about as the ground of being, the I am presence. It's just the simple nature of consciousness itself, which we normally identify with the mind. But what these teachings are saying is that this essential self, who and what we really are, can be differentiated from the mind. And when we engage in inquiry and contemplation and meditation, when we actually sit within the field of our psyche, we can see that this essential self is essential. That's why I'm using the word essential self. It is the most essential nature of our innermost subjectivity of who we are, and that can be differentiated from the mind. Okay, so essentially that's the message in the last video. And in that video, I looked at it from the standpoint of the self as a resource to the psyche. So in this video, we're going to be focusing more specifically, building on that, about how the discovery of this essential self catalyzes and supports a bigger process of transformation in the human psyche. And that process of transformation is what I call spiritual awakening. In a nutshell, from a psychological standpoint anyway, I think spiritual awakening is a much broader, overall subject or experience. But this is really the psychological aspect of how our psyche is transformed in the process of spiritual awakening. So what I'm going to focus on here is looking at a couple different elements of how the discovery of this essential self creates a reorienting process within the psyche, and then creates the environment for this powerful process of transformation to take place. Okay, so the first thing is identity. So the essential shift that happens when we recognize that the self is actually who we are, and that the mind and the self have a relationship, and they're very much, experienced as one when we're in this human experience. But yet we recognize that this self is who we really are. It catalyzes a shift in our identity. Okay? So the human, the function of identity in the psyche takes place through what we call the ego, right? The ego is the organizing principle in the psyche which function is to identify ourselves, right? So before this spiritual awakening happens, or this, to make it more simple, this recognition within the psyche that the self can be differentiated from the mind, until we do that, we basically are operating in a default unconscious mode where our identity of who we are is very much based on the ego, organizing us in relationship to our mind, to our body. So the example that I think can be helpful with this is when we're living in this kind of more unconscious default mode. It's like we're driving a car, okay? So in this example, the driver of the car is the self, and the car is the mind and body. So when we're in this unconscious mode, we are identified with the car. So we're driving around, we're moving around, we're identified with the color, make, and model of our car, how old it is, how well it's functioning, etc., etc. So that's the default mode of our human identity. It's really a identity that's a mental construct, right? We're identifying ourselves through thought. We're identifying ourselves through our experience of the body, our perception of the body. And that identity can be more fixed, which is a less healthy ego psychologically. A healthy ego is a more fluid concept and orientation to who we are, which understands that we are a fluid system. We're constantly changing. We're constantly, hopefully, growing, which requires change. So anyway, that's all just to present this metaphor for our identity when we're in this more unconscious default mode, where our identity is based on what we could call the ego self, right, or the ego mind. And again, I don't want to, it's not that that's a bad thing, that this egoic identification is just a natural and healthy part of the human psyche, okay? So what happens when we have this kind of spiritual awakening or this recognition, we start to see in the field of our experience that who we really are, the innermost subject, is this essential self. So when we discover this essential self, it has this first profound shift of our identity. So instead of the identity being formed through this ego construct, which again is valid, but it's limited, then we start to pull those apart and recognize, oh, wait a second, I'm actually this conscious being that's having the experience of this mind and these thoughts and these sensations. I'm a conscious being having this human experience, okay? So it's very easy to say that and to recognize theoretically that's as simple as it is. But yet that very simple shift in the point of identification within ourselves of who we are is the essential piece of all what spiritual awakening is, and catalyzes a complete reorganization of our human psyche and ultimately our down to the cellular level of our body. So let me look a little more specifically at how this transformation happens. So again, what I'm talking about here is that the principle of identity in the psyche, right, the self, how we are organized in terms of what's the point of identification of who and what I am, is the central organizing principle in the psyche, right? Because the self is the center. The self is the thing that we are, right? It's the central organizing principle of the psyche. So, therefore, the shift between myself being my self-identity being through an ego mind, which is based on the limited mind, limited body, everything that's limited about this human being, the fact that I die, the fact that I'm subject to pain, the fact that all the realities that are applied to being human, those are put into a very different perspective when we shift our point of identification. So, back to the driver example, we recognize that we are actually the driver. We're not the car. And that creates, again, just a different orientation, right? A different reorganizing of this central principle in the psyche. So we're rooting our sense of identity in this self versus in this, self and mind body complex being one. And so the reason why this is so profound is that when we're in this default mode of identifying through the ego self, we are experiencing the limitations of being human, right? We are afraid of death. There's all kinds of vulnerabilities and an experience of lack, right? We can easily be caught in the illusion of that we are somehow limited and lacking because this human being it's limited. So when we're in this default mode, there's an implicit sense of lack, suffering, and separation. So there's a lot of pain associated with living in this limited state of being identified through the ego self. So when we recognize that who we actually are is this essential self, then we are identifying with a reality that's actually whole by nature, that is the nature of love itself, that is the nature of peace, that is unchanging, is secure, is the ultimate security. And again, all these words are just pointing to a reality that can only be recognized through your direct experience of it, by differentiating the self from the mind and body. So this is a profound shift within the identity of who I am. If I recognize that who I am is this innate wholeness, is full of infinite possibility, infinite creativity, is innately, there's a sense of actual intelligence or knowledge, even, I want to say, that comes with it. Again, these words are difficult to use, but it is this sense of like infinite intelligence, infinite knowledge. It's a totally different point of identifying who we are. If we recognize that this is who we really are, we're having this human experience, then the human experience itself is transformed. Our identity is rooted in a sense of freedom, wholeness, security. I know that when the human being dies, there's no death. And obviously this gets into, there's a whole cosmology here, and we can talk about all those different, more complex layers of the cosmic picture that can go along with this vision, but I'm focusing here just on the individual psychology. Okay? So this identity shift is the foundation of catalyzing a profound transformation in the psyche. So number 2 is what happens then when we recognize we're the driver and not the car. It creates a gap, which I call inner space. It creates this muscle, we could call it, or this gap in between our witnessing consciousness and the contents of our experience in the form of our mind, our thoughts, our beliefs, our patterns. So it creates this, what I call, it's like the most powerful resource in the psyche, in the form of that I can become the witness much more easily. And this is what people practice as mindfulness, even before they might have this type of differentiation of the self. So people can cultivate this witnessing capacity without actually having a bigger spiritual awakening. It's what we call mindfulness. But the principle of mindfulness is based on the fact that there is this essential witnessing self, which is separate from the thoughts and separate from the human form. And so it's just that when we become more conscious of that differentiation, it magnifies exponentially our capacity to be mindfully aware of ourselves, to witness what is happening in our mind and body in any given moment. So why is it so important that we have this capacity, this exponentially powerful capacity to become more mindfully aware of ourselves? Okay, and so that takes us to number 3, which is this alchemy of transformation. So let's look at what this alchemy of transformation is as a process, and then we can see how this differentiation of the self, discovery of the essential self, is this greater catalyst. So that's like I've already said, it's the identity shift, which is a huge catalyst in and of itself, which then creates this magnified capacity gap, so that we can become even that much more able to witness ourselves and have this inner space. And then how does that then support this greater process of transformation? So this bigger process of transformation is literally the deconstruction of one paradigm in the human being, body, mind, psyche, the deconstruction of one paradigm and the construction of a new paradigm. Okay? This deconstruction and construction is based on this identity shift at the core. So if you look at the central organizing principle, the most fundamental core belief, we could say, which is a organizing structure in the psyche, which translates then into the brain, into the neural pathways, into the thoughts, feelings, behaviors. The central principle of that is identity. That's what I believe to be true, and what my whole thesis is about in my dissertation. That when the central organizing principle shifts from this ego-based identity of who I am to this being rooted in this essential self, that is like an earthquake at the root of the psyche, which shakes everything up, because everything, it's like a tree growing up out of this central core belief of identity of who I am. The whole psyche is rooted in that core belief. So everything, all the other core beliefs that come out of that central one are all going to be uprooted, right? Because everything's rooted in that. So what we're looking at is the deconstruction of the paradigm of the ego self and the building up of a new paradigm based on the essential, I am the essential self. And so what that process actually is deconstructing all of the core beliefs in the psyche which are conditioned. It's all, as we know, it's very common knowledge now, understanding in psychology and in neuroscience and developmental psychology, that the brain is, we come into the world and the brain is just like a computer that gets programmed by our experience, by our family unit, most intimate core attachment relationships, our primary caregivers, and then the external society and the cultural values and beliefs that are informing our conditioning as well. So by the time we grow up into an adult human being, our body and mind are conditioned. Our brain is kind of wired in a certain way. It's programmed. And so this process is really one of literally rewiring the brain, rewiring the nervous system, transforming the body even down to a cellular level. So it's a complete overhaul of the human being. And multiple upgrades, continuous upgrades, just like your devices. And so essentially what's required, bringing in this mindfulness, this magnified capacity that comes with this kind of awakening, is like the essential tool and support that catalyzes this process. Is because the process of deconstructing this old paradigm and constructing a new one, which happens simultaneously, by the way, they're both happening at once. It's almost like, we're slowly taking one egg out of this basket and putting it in this basket and back and forth. But that process requires us to have this self-awareness. Which is like this pure gold in the process, right? And that self-awareness can be cultivated through different healing practices, through therapy, through, all kinds of transformative psychological and spiritual transformation work that, healing work that supports the process, right? But where the rubber meets the road is really in our day-to-day life. In our day-to-day mind and body and navigating through the world and making choices. What am I going to eat? What am I going to do? And so that's why having this capacity to really be witness to ourselves in any given moment, in our moment to moment, is the key here. And so I'll give you an example. That it's like when we go about our day-to-day life and in our relationships and in our work, in our, attempts to create whatever we're trying to create in our lives, we are constantly being triggered and experiencing the conditioned self. So what's necessary in order to transform is that transformation that takes place in the moment to moment. So, such and such happens with my friend or my partner, that triggers, let's say my abandonment wounding. That's where the rubber meets the road, is where we develop the capacity to witness ourselves, to become aware. We've kind of done the work to connect the dots. Here's the moment where my stuff is coming up, my conditioned self, which I might know intellectually isn't true, and I might have a total understanding and integrated knowledge even, but it's still in the body, right? It's still, those core beliefs which are unconscious are still running the show in here, right? So the real work is in the moment to moment, being able to, at any given moment, differentiate and become the witness, and and then discerning what's happening. And once you can recognize it's happening, my conditioning is being triggered, then you choose to become the witness. And then you have this space, this inner space is there, and that's where you have the choice to bring in your wisdom, to bring in the part of your mind that does know. And this is what we call discernment, right? Where we are discerning within the field of our experience, okay, I have these sensations in my body, I have these beliefs and these projections that are coming out about the situation and myself and this person that are all based on my conditioned reality, an internal projection coming out. But if I'm able to discern that that's happening, then I have the space to choose to act consciously, to choose to act in alignment with what my intentions are, with what this other paradigm that I'm cultivating here knows to be true, and then I have the capacity to make that choice. So the small things like this are actually the big things. And that every time in the moment to moment that we are able to see our conditioned responses, create that distance, not react from that conditioned response, but actually make the choice to respond in alignment with my higher knowing or my discernment, my wisdom. Every time we do that, you are literally rewiring your brain, rewiring your body. You are transforming. This is the alchemy of transformation. And again, I'm speaking about the power of these, day-to-day moments. Specifically here, there are also all these other practices and deeper, types of healing work that can be effective in helping this process, but whatever you're doing in that realm of deeper work, whatever it is, there's always the integration, where the rubber meets the road is where the real rewiring of our systems takes place. And so I'm going to leave it there for now. I know that's a lot. This has gone on a little bit long today, but these are pretty big, this is a pretty big paradigm and message that I'm bringing forward, and I hope that it helps create a map of understanding for this process of transformation, and how, again, weaving back to the beginning, how this essential differentiation of the inner self is the key to all of this. Not that people can't do incredible healing work and transformation without this differentiating and discovery of the essential self, but this is the key for those of you who are really on this path and that this speaks to. This is really the key to catalyzing this process. And in the times that we're living in right now, it can be a very profound game changer in your process. So again, I hope that this is helpful, and I wish you all the very best. And I will also begin doing some Facebook Live weekly meditations in the next month. Sometime in June, I'll begin doing a Monday night weekly meditation, and I have more to say about that as it gets closer to that time. But if you're interested in that, you can go to my Facebook page, New Paradigm Psychology Bay Area, and just join the page, and you'll get the updates on that as it comes to fruition. Okay, thank you so much, and be well.